There's an idea in your head that you haven't killed yet. You tried. You've talked yourself out of it 100 times. You found every logical reason why now isn't the right moment, but it keeps coming back quietly, stubbornly, like it knows something about you that you're still afraid to admit. That idea is not the problem. You are. And somewhere underneath all the excuses and the scrolling and the planning that never becomes doing, you already know that. Rayan was 26 years old, and he had everything he needed to start. Not everything he wanted, everything he needed. He had the skill, he had the idea, he had a laptop, a stable internet connection, and enough knowledge from 3 years in his field to genuinely help people. He had weekends that went mostly unused. He had evenings that disappeared into his phone without leaving anything behind. What he didn't have was a start date. The idea had come to him on a Tuesday afternoon, 18 months ago, sitting in a work meeting he wasn't really present in. Someone was talking about a problem, a common problem, the kind that kept coming up again and again in his industry. And Rayan had sat there thinking, I know how to solve that. Not just partially, fully. I actually know what's missing. He'd opened his notes app right there in the meeting, typed it out fast before the thought could disappear. The idea, the gap in the market, a rough shape of what the solution could look like. 3 sentences. That was enough to feel the excitement move through him like something real. He still had those 3 sentences, 18 months later, untouched, underneath 17 grocery lists and a note that just said, call the dentist. He told himself he was in the research phase, then the planning phase, then the saving phase, then the waiting for the right moment phase. Each phase felt responsible, mature even, like he wasn't being reckless, like he was being smart about it. But phases kept appearing. One would end and another would quietly take its place, and the idea stayed exactly where it was, safe in the notes app, safe in his head, never in the world. His days had a shape to them. Wake up around 7, lie there for 20 minutes doing nothing useful, just scrolling through things that didn't matter and wouldn't be remembered by noon. Get up, make coffee, get through work, come home feeling drained in a way that was hard to explain because nothing particularly hard had happened. Eat something, watch something, sleep, repeat. It was fine. That was the honest word for it. Fine. Not painful. Not joyful, just fine, smooth and uneventful and quietly suffocating in a way he couldn't point to directly. The worst part wasn't the emptiness. The worst part was that he knew exactly what would fill it, and he still wasn't doing it. There was this conversation he kept having with himself. It usually started when things got too quiet, when the show ended and he hadn't picked the next one yet, when he was lying in bed and sleep wasn't coming, when he was in the shower on a Saturday morning with no plans and too much time to think. The conversation always started the same way. Okay, this week, for real this time, I'm gonna sit down and actually map this out. Just a few hours. That's all it takes to start. And then the other part of him would answer. With what energy? You're already tired from the week. You need to rest first. You can't build something good when you're running on empty. Wait until you feel ready. Wait until the timing is better. And the first part would agree, because it sounded reasonable, because rest is real, because timing does matter, because there was always a version of the excuse that felt like wisdom. That's the thing about self-deception that makes it so effective. It doesn't sound like lying. It sounds like being careful. Rayan was very careful. He researched business models for months without registering a single domain name. He watched hours of content about entrepreneurship without opening a spreadsheet. He followed people who were building things, watched their progress, felt inspired, closed the app, and went to sleep. He had opinions on strategy. He had thoughts about branding. He could talk about audience building and product market fit with a confidence that made people think he was already doing it. He wasn't doing anything. And underneath all the research and the knowledge and the carefully maintained image of someone who had plans, there was a feeling he didn't let himself look at directly for a very long time. Fear. Not the dramatic kind. Not the fear that announces itself. The quiet kind. The kind that wears the costume of logic. The kind that says, I'm just being realistic, when it actually means I'm terrified of finding out I'm not as capable as I believe. The kind that says the market is too competitive, when it actually means, what if I try my hardest and it still doesn't work? Because that was the real risk. Not failure in the abstract, but trying fully and failing anyway. That specific kind of failure, the one that couldn't be explained away by, I didn't really try. If he never truly started, he could always tell himself the idea was still good, still possible, still waiting for the right moment. But if he started and it didn't work. Then what? The turning point didn't come dramatically. It wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't a revelation. It wasn't a conversation that changed his life or a video that rewired his thinking. It was a Tuesday evening in November, ordinary and unremarkable, and he was sitting on the floor of his apartment with his back against the couch because he'd slid off it somewhere during whatever he'd been watching and hadn't bothered to get back up. The show had ended. He hadn't picked another one. He was just sitting there in the quiet, and he thought about the note, the 3 sentences from 18 months ago. He could picture them without opening his phone. He'd read them enough times, and for the first time, instead of feeling the usual mixture of guilt and excitement, then avoidance, he felt something different, something slower, something that didn't have a clean name. He thought about who he'd been when he wrote those sentences. 24 years old, sitting in that meeting, feeling something light up in his chest, believing in that moment that this was going somewhere, that he was someone who would actually do something with an idea like this. And then he thought about who he was now, 2 years later, still sitting, still waiting, still calling it planning. He didn't feel angry at himself. That's not what it was. It was quieter than anger, more like grief almost, a kind of sadness for the version of himself who kept getting promised tomorrow and kept waking up to another today that looked exactly like yesterday. He sat with that feeling for a while. He didn't run from it into his phone. He just let it be there. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted. Not a decision, actually, more like a recognition. The recognition that there was never going to be a ready, that ready was a moving target designed by fear to always stay just one preparation away, that every person who had ever built anything had started before they felt ready, not because they were braver, but because they understood that the feeling of readiness was a reward for starting, not a requirement. He'd had it backwards. He'd been waiting to feel ready so he could start, when the only way to feel ready was to start. He didn't do anything dramatic that night. He opened his notes app, read the 3 sentences, and then, underneath them, he wrote one question, not a plan, not a goal, just a question. What is the smallest possible version of this I could build in the next 30 days? That was it. He put the phone down, went to sleep. But the next morning, something was different. Not in the world, in him. There was a quiet underneath the usual noise, a kind of stillness that felt less like paralysis and more like direction. He made his coffee. He sat at his desk, and before he opened his work email, he spent 20 minutes answering the question he'd written the night before. 20 minutes. That was all. But they were the most honest 20 minutes he'd spent in over a year. He wasn't ready. He still wasn't ready. The fear was still there. The uncertainty was still real. But he was moving now, slowly, imperfectly, without any guarantees, moving. And something about moving, even slightly, even uncertainly, felt more like himself than all the careful waiting ever did. Weeks passed, then a month, then 2. He didn't build something perfect. He built something small and real and genuinely useful. He put it out into the world before he felt confident. He watched it find its first few people. He made mistakes he learned from. He woke up some mornings dreading it and did it anyway. He woke up other mornings genuinely excited, and those mornings started to outnumber the hard ones. He was still tired sometimes, still uncertain, still figuring it out, but the Sunday evening heaviness was gone. Not because everything had worked out, but because he was no longer a person waiting to become someone. He was already becoming, slowly, messily, genuinely. That is what the waiting had been stealing from him. Not success, not results, the feeling of being someone who acts on what they believe in. Somewhere in your phone right now, there is a note or a voice memo or a saved post or just a thought you keep returning to. You know what it is. The question was never whether the idea was good enough. The question was always whether you were willing to find out. And you can keep waiting for the version of yourself that feels ready, or you can understand that the version of yourself who starts anyway is the one
who becomes ready. The idea doesn't need a better moment. It needs you to stop treating your fear like it's wisdom.